What is the mark of the beast in Revelation 13:18 actually supposed to be about? Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion. And the first thing to note here is that it has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with our day or any day in the future. This text is a late 1st century CE piece of Jewish apocalyptic literature. It is intended to evoke an emotional response. It is intended to be shocking, to be grotesque, to be frightening, in order to exhort the hearer or the reader of the text to greater fidelity, to following Jesus, to the community of followers of Jesus. It is not about the future. It's not supposed to help us identify a person or a technology or a nation or anything like that that is going to bring about the second coming. None of that is going to happen. There are three main things going on with the imagery that's being used in Genesis 13:18. And the mark of the beast is something that people are supposed to receive in their right hand or on their forehead. And I think scholars have identified at least three main things that seem to be going on. There could be more, but the three main things relate to a mark that actually goes on the forehead, relates to counterfeit worship practices, and probably relates to coinage. So what's the mark that goes on the forehead? Well, in the ancient world, you could mark someone to indicate that they were enslaved to someone else. And we see this in a lot of different ways in the Hebrew Bible. And probably the one that's closest to what's going on in Revelation is in Ezekiel 9, where you mark someone as a possession or a follower of a leader, which was usually a deity. And so in Ezekiel 9, we have God telling someone to go through the city and to mark on the forehead everyone who is disgusted by the abominations that are going on in Jerusalem. And then God is going to send executioners through the city, and everyone who does not have the mark is going to be killed. Old, young, male, female, even little babies. And so the idea there is that the mark designates the person who is a follower of the God of Israel and therefore is under their protection. So that's one of the things that is likely going on here. Another has to do with the fact that it talks about the right hand and the forehead, this mark going there. And there's only one place in the Bible where anything is associated with the hand and the forehead together. And that is the commandment that we find in a couple of different places to keep the law on the hand and the forehead, which gave rise in later periods to the practice of phylacteries. So that's where little strips of paper have certain verses from the Torah written on them, and then they're rolled up or folded up and put in a box that goes on the forehead. There's one that goes on the back of the head, then there's a leather strap that goes around the left arm. And so a lot of scholars think this practice was probably just beginning to start up in some form, not exactly as we know it today, but in some form around this time period. And so to have the beast associated with something similar that goes on the forehead and then the right hand would represent counterfeit worship practices. They're trying to copy what goes on within Judaism, but it's not the exact same thing. And so that may be dismissing worship of Roman emperors and the worship of the Roman Empire as counterfeit practices associated with the worship of the true God of Israel. So that's a second thing that may be going on with the imagery being evoked by this notion of the mark of the beast. The third thing probably has to do with coinage, because we have this reference to the number 666, which is the number of a man. And this probably has to do with Roman coinage, which would have the image of an emperor on it and would also have their name on it. And so the number 666 is widely agreed to be gematria. In other words, you take the letters that spell out a name and then you convert them to Hebrew characters, and then you convert them to their numerical values and add it all up and you get to 666. And so Emperor Nero is probably the one that sits closest to the surface. The Emperor Nero would add up to 666 if you're spelling it in Greek and then transliterating that into Hebrew. If you're spelling it in Latin and then transliterating that into Hebrew, it actually adds up to 616, 616, which is a number that we find in one of the early manuscripts of Revelation. And so the mark of the beast, the name of the man, the number of the name, That's all probably using gematria to encode reference to either a specific emperor. Emperor Nero died well before the book of Revelation was written, but there was a tradition going around that he had either faked his death and escaped to the Parthians and was going to come back with a Parthian army, or he was going to come back to life or something and come back and take over the Roman Empire again, which would obviously represent a gigantic threat to followers of Jesus. And so that's kind of a scary thing that might happen. But there are other scholars who suggest that 666 has reference to passages from the Hebrew Bible, perhaps having to do with Solomon and other things. So it's tying together a lot of different imagery, but almost certainly, at least in part, is referring to Emperor Nero, the Roman Empire. And so the fact that you would not be able to buy or sell without the mark is likely a reference to Roman coinage, which is necessary for buying and selling, which has the mark of the emperor upon it, which would be exchanged with the right hand. So that's probably the most likely third candidate for what's going on here. And then there are probably other things that we're not able to reconstruct because we just don't have enough data. So the idea of the mark of the beast is not something that we need to be on the lookout for. It's not Amazon One. It's not any new technology. It's certainly not hats that people wear or anything like that. It's a combination of different ideas in this imagery that's supposed to evoke a certain kind of emotional response in late first century followers of Jesus when they hear this story, the mark of the beast, the number of the beast, the name, the number of the name, all that kind of stuff. So it's really about late first century CE Christianity. It has nothing to do with today, and there's nothing to be on the lookout for in relation to the mark of the beast or the number of the beast or the name of the beast or any end times, because all of that was just literary imagery that was being created at the end of the first century CE, again, to exhort followers of Jesus to greater faithfulness to the community, to following Jesus, to keep them unspotted from the evil Roman Empire. And the fit for this video has been Data Over Dogma.